objects, as names are, and by no means copies of what is going on materially in the depths of nature; but just as the sportsman's eye, which yields but a summary graphic image, can trace the flight of a bird through the air quite well enough to shoot it and bring it down, so the myths of a wise philosopher about the origin of life, or of dreams, though expressed symbolically, may reveal the permanent movement of nature to us, and may kindle in us just sentiments and true expectations in respect to our fate. For his own soul is the bird this sportsman is shooting. Now I think these new myths of Freud's about life, like his old ones about dreams, are calculated to enlighten and to chasten us enormously about ourselves. The human spirit, when it awakes, finds itself in trouble. It is burdened, for no reason it can assign, with all sorts of anxieties about food, pressures, pricks, noises, and pains. It is born, as another wise myth has it, in original sin; and the passions and ambitions of life, as they come on, only complicate this burden and make it heavier, without rendering it less incessant or gratuitous. Whence this fatality, or whither does it lead? It comes from heredity, and it leads to propagation. When we ask how heredity could be started or transmitted, our ignorance of nature and of past times reduces us to silence or to wild conjectures. Something, let us call it matter, must always have existed, and some of its parts, under pressure of the others, must have got tied up into knots, like the mainspring of a watch, in such a violent and unhappy manner that when the pressure is released they fly open as fast as they can, and unravel themselves with a vast sense of relief. Hence the longings to satisfy latent passions, with the fugitive pleasure in doing so. But the external agencies that originally wound up that mainspring never cease to operate. Every fresh stimulus gives it another turn, until it snaps, or grows flaccid, or is unhinged. Moreover, from time to time, when circumstances change, these external agencies may encrust that primary organ with minor organs attached to it. Every impression, every adventure, leaves a trace, or rather a seed, behind it. It produces a further complication in the structure of the body, and a fresh charge, which tends to repeat the impressed motion in season and out of season. Hence that perpetual docility or ductility in living substance which enables it to learn tricks and to remember facts, and, when the seeds of past experience marry and cross in the brain, to imagine new experiences, pleasing or horrible. Every act initiates a new habit, and may implant a new instinct. We see people, even late in life, carried away by political or religious contagions, or developing strange vices. There would be no peace in old age, but rather a greater and greater obsession of all sorts of cares, were it not that time, in exposing us to many adventurous influences, weakens or discharges our primitive passions. We are less greedy, less lusty, less hopeful, less generous. But these weakened primitive impulses are naturally by far the strongest and most deeply rooted in the organism; so that, although an old man may be converted, or may take up some hobby, there is usually something thin in his elderly zeal, compared with the heartiness of youth. Nor is it edifying to see a soul in which the plainer human passions are extinct becoming a hotbed of chance delusions. In any case, fresh habit taking root in the organism forms a little mainspring or instinct of its own, like a parasite, so that an elaborate mechanism is gradually developed, where each lever and spring holds the other down, and all hold the mainspring down together, allowing it to unwind itself only very gradually, and meantime keeping the whole clock ticking and revolving, and causing the smooth outer face which it turns to the world, so clean and innocent, to mark the time of day amiably for the passer by. But there is a terrible complicated labor going on beneath, propelled with difficulty, and balanced precariously with much secret friction and failure. No wonder that the engine often gets visibly out of order, or stops short. The marvel is that it ever manages to go at all. Nor is it satisfied with simply revolving, and when at last dismounted, starting afresh in the person of some seed it has dropped, a portion of its substance with all its concentrated instincts wound up tightly within it, and eager to repeat the ancestral experiment. All this growth is not merely material and vain. Each clock in revolving strikes the hour, even the quarters, and often with lovely chimes. These chimes we call perceptions, feelings, purposes, and dreams. And it is because we are taken up entirely with this mental music, and perhaps think that it sounds of itself and needs no music box to make it, that we find such difficulty in conceiving nature of our own clocks, and are compelled to describe them only musically, that is, in myths. But the ineptitude of our aesthetic minds to unravel the nature of mechanism does not deprive these minds of their own clearness and euphony. Besides sounding their various musical notes, they have the cognitive function of indicating the hour and catching the echoes of distant events or of maturing inward dispositions. This information and emotion, added to incidental pleasures in satisfying our various passions, make up the life of an incarnate spirit. They reconcile it to the external fatality that has wound up the organism and is breaking it down, and they rescue this organism and all its works from the indignity of being a vain complication and a waste of motion. That the end of life should be death may sound sad. Yet what other end can anything have? The end of an evening party is to go to bed, but its use is to gather congenial people together that they may pass the time pleasantly. An invitation to the dance is not rendered ironical because the dance cannot last forever. The youngest of us, and the most vigorously wound up, after a few hours has had enough of sinuous stepping and prancing. The transitoriness of things is essential to their physical being, and not at all sad in itself. It becomes sad by virtue of a sentimental illusion, which makes us imagine that they wish to endure, and that their end is always untimely. But in a healthy nature it is not so. What is truly sad is to have some impulse frustrated in the midst of its career, and robbed of its chosen object; and what is painful is to have an organ lacerated or destroyed when it is still vigorous, and not ready for its natural sleep and dissolution. We must not confuse the itch which our unsatisfied instincts continue to cause with the pleasure of satisfying and dismissing each of them in turn. Could they all be satisfied harmoniously, we should be satisfied once for all and completely. Then doing and dying would coincide throughout and be a perfect pleasure. The same insight is contained in another wise myth which has inspired morality and religion in India from time immemorial. I mean the doctrine of karma. We are born, it says, with a heritage, a character imposed, and a long task assigned, all due to the ignorance which in our past lives has led us into all sorts of commitments. These obligations we must pay off, relieving the pure spirit within us from its accumulated burdens, from debts and assets both equally oppressive. We cannot disentangle ourselves by mere frivolity, nor by suicide. Frivolity would only involve us more deeply in the toils of fate, and suicide would but truncate our misery and leave us forever a confused failure. When life is understood to be a process of redemption, its various phases are taken up in turn without haste and without undue attachment. Their coming and going have all the keenness of pleasure, the holiness of sacrifice, and the beauty of art. The point is to have expressed and discharged all that was latent in us, and to this perfect relief various temperaments and various traditions assign different names, calling it having one's day, or doing one's duty, or realizing one's ideal, or saving one's soul. The task in any case is defined and imposed on us by nature,